in the book of 1 John tonight. And this evening is our second in our little mini-series to accompany our new small group studies, where we're looking at various attributes of the character of God, him being good, him being holy, him being just, and so on. And then, after looking at who God is, what the plan is that in our small groups, we'll be looking at, okay, if that's what God is like, and we're supposed to reflect God to the world because we're made in his image, how do we do that? How does it apply to us? And so this evening, even though they're not here, I am under strict instructions from Greg and Graham. My brief is this. The second part of that, where we work out, okay, how does this apply to us? How are we supposed to reflect God's love to people? That's got to be left till Tuesday and Wednesday in the small groups. Sorry about that. That's where you're going to be talking about it. My brief tonight is to talk about how God is a God of love and what his love looks like and what it means. And so that's what I'm going to intend to do. And maybe some of the applications of how we put it into practice will bleed through, I don't know. But the intention is this, for you and for me and for all of us to be astounded by the love of God at the end of tonight. That when we leave, we're thinking, God's love is far bigger and far better than I had ever thought before. So we're going to try and do that. We're going to try and leave with a sense of awe of God's love, and then we'll take it to small groups in the week. And right at the start, what I need to say is this. Everything I'm going to say tonight barely scratches the surface of all there is to say about God's love and for God to be a God of love. In fact, quite helpfully, as I was reading on Friday in preparation for tonight, I read the quote which is up on the screen, trying to explain the fullness of what it means to say God is love is like rugby tackling a pool table. You might make a dent in it, you might budge it slightly, but ultimately you won't have moved it very much. That means in everything that I do say tonight, there is so much more to say. All I'm going to be doing is scratching the surface, but hopefully it will infuse you in some way. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be thinking about what it means to say God is love. And when it comes to that statement, right at the very start, we have to deal with a few problems to start with, because we can have all sorts of preconceived ideas about what it means to hear that phrase, God is love. We can bring in all sorts of baggage from our society, from our church experience in the past. And if we allow those wrong interpretations to colour how we understand God's love, what God's love is like, we won't be who we should be. We won't understand God properly. So we're going to try and look at some of those problems to start with. And I've got 4. There's probably more, but I'm just going to go with 4. So problem number 1, when we say God is love, we've got the problem of language. And I'll go into this in a bit more depth later on. But love in English has many different meanings, multiple levels of meaning. So I can say this. I can say, I love Lorna. And I've got a picture of her. Don't let her know I've used a picture on a PowerPoint, okay? Because she will not be happy. This never happened. I love Lorna and I love the boys. I love them. I also love it when Manchester United lose. I love to see that. That's a glorious thing to see an unhappy Manchester United fan. I also love it when the police catch someone after many, many years of trying to catch someone. And on there's a picture of I think it's the Garden State Killer, and they caught this guy after many, many years. I love it when that kind of thing happens. But that's not the only ways we use love. I also love cake. I love cake. And I'm not saying which one I love the most by how many pictures I decided to put on the PowerPoint, but I love cake. Love is a very slippery word. We can use it in so many different ways. So, does God love us the way a husband loves a wife? Does God love us the way I love it when Manchester United lose? Does God love us the way I love cake? How does God love us? Like I say, we'll come to that a bit more in a minute, but love is a slippery word. Problem number 2, and these next 2 are going to be ones you might have encountered in church. It could be you're coloured by one of these next 2 to a greater or lesser degree. That we can sentimentalise God's love. So we can have the kind of Titanic way of looking at love, where there's this great love story where 2 people come together and build that up into okay, that's what God's love must be like. He must be this kind of sentimental, romantic character. And the idea that God would ever get angry with us, or that he might really, really hold people to account one day, or anything negative, he wouldn't do that because God is a God of love, isn't he? He wouldn't ever be horrible. He wouldn't ever do anything that we find a little bit distasteful, because he's just forgiving and loving, and he's like the hero in the film. Truth is, though, we know from our own experience that love and anger can go together at the same time and in the same moment. Every parent in the room knows that. You can love your child and want to strangle them at the same moment, and they can coexist. Love and anger are not necessarily two complete polar things. In fact, a God that never ever gets angry is a God that doesn't love. Let me say that again. A God that never gets angry is a God that doesn't love. And let me try and demonstrate this for you. Imagine that walking home from church tonight, you're all excited about God's love, and then someone mugs you. Hopefully this is nothing prophetic going on here, but let's say that happens. You get mugged, and they steal your wallet, they steal your phone, they take your jewelry off you if you're wearing it, and they're caught. That's the good bit of this story. They get caught, and they're up before the judge. And the judge, summing up the case, says this: I'm a judge of love. I know you've done wrong, but forgive and forget, you're free to go. You would not be happy in that moment, would you? You would be saying, where's the justice? And you would conclude that the judge doesn't love you because he wasn't prepared to do what's right. For God to be a God of love, he's got to be a God of justice as well. To say God is love and to say things like he would never punish people is to rip something away from what the Bible teaches about him. So we can have the sentimental approach to God is love, and then you can go to the other extreme. So problem number 3, if some people in church can over-sentimentalize God's love and jam-pack it with all kinds of floaty emotions, other people can remove all emotion from God at all. And this happens actually for very, very good reasons. So if you're going to small group this week, one of the things you'll see is this. The New Testament word for love is a Greek word called agape. And I limit myself to one mention of a Greek word a year because I can see you glazing over already at the fact that a preacher has mentioned a Greek word. But it's the one that's used in the New Testament for love. It happens 259 times, and it's always about action and not feeling, or so it seems. So to say that love is an action, that makes things like love your enemies more understandable, because you don't like them, but you love them and you do good things for them. But if you take love as an action and you try and say that's all it means for God to love, there's a problem. There's a problem again, because the whole of the Bible gives you a different picture. Let me demonstrate. In Psalm 103, it says this: as a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. So, does God have compassion or not? If love's just an action, does God have compassion, or is there more to it than that? I think there's more to it. The parable of the prodigal son, do you think Jesus describes a father legging it across fields, throwing his arms around his son and kissing him is devoid of emotion? I don't think it is. If that's a demonstration of what God's love is, it's saying there it's an action, yes, but there's an emotion with it as well. In the great passage in 1 Corinthians 13, which always gets read at weddings about what love is like, where Paul says this: if I give all that I have to the poor and if I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast. So if I do something as an act of the will, as an action, but I don't have love, I gain nothing. Love, he's doing something which is all about action and then saying, but if I don't have love. So love can't be exhausted by the thought that it's just an act of the will. Doesn't make sense. Perhaps, and this is one I find as the clincher, in Hosea chapter 11, in that book, God is compared to a betrayed husband who is pursuing his wife relentlessly. And the intensity of his emotions come out in chapter 11, where he says things like this: "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son." But the more God calls his people in that book, the more they go away from him. The more they drift away. God has healed them, God has taught them, God has made them his people, but they've loved idols and they haven't loved him. And so it comes to a climax, and he promises he's going to judge them, and they're going to go into exile, and it looks like it's all over for them. And then we read these words that are on the screen. These have got emotional intensity, I think. "How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, Israel? How can I treat you like Admah?" I can't read it from here. "Like Admah. How can I make you like Zebub?" Yeah, that place. "My heart is changed within me. All my compassion is aroused." God is a God who has emotions. He's not just all about action. He has emotion too. So love is an act of the will for the good of other people, but it's not without emotion. God's love is not Mr. Spock-like. You are not some person without any emotions at all, and neither is God. God's emotions are always perfect. He's angry perfectly. He's joyful perfectly. When the Bible talks about there being joy in heaven over a sinner who repents, there's joy in heaven because there's joy in God in that moment. And then there's problem number 4. Love is always other person focused. And yet there are a few narcissists out there who love themselves, and I'm trying not to think of any presidents of any countries out there, but generally love has an object that is not itself. The person loving is not generally loving themselves. Why is this a potential problem for God? Well, it depends on what we do with it. If we say that love has always got to be directed outwards, what does this mean for God? Well, it goes wrong when we conclude things like this. When I was in my old Sunday school many years ago now, someone who was much brighter than me asked this question: why did God create the world? Why did God create the world? And the Sunday school teacher was thrown by the question for a moment and then came back with this answer: God was lonely, and he made the world so he could have people to love and people to share it with. If love is other person focused, that makes sense, but it doesn't make sense to say God was lonely and he needs us and that's why he created the world. He doesn't. God is not some lonely old deity who was desperate for someone to love, and so he made you specially so he could love you. That is not what God is like. His love is far, far better than that. So, up to now, I've spelt out problems, always a good thing to do. Language is a problem. God's love is not sentimental. His love and his anger have to find a way to coexist. Love is about action, but it's not just about action. God has perfect emotions with it too. And he doesn't love us because he's needy and vulnerable and just needs someone to give a cuddle to. So what is God's love like? What is God's love like? And we're going to get to the reading now, finally. And this bit should move us. So from 1 John chapter 4, from verse 8, middle of verse 8, we read this: God is love. God is love. That's the first thing. That means this: God is someone for whom love is intrinsic to who he is. God is love in and of himself. Now, immediately you might think, okay, a minute ago you said love has to be other person focused, so how does that work for God? Well, if love requires an object, God can do that. We get a little window into what God is like in the book of John. And in John 17 and verse 24, Jesus is praying to his Father, and he says this: Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am, and to see my glory, the glory you have given me, because you loved me before the creation of the world. Before there was anything, before the universe was a twinkle in God's eye, God was completely satisfied. Completely. Before the universe came to be, there's this little community of three people, Father, Son, and Spirit, and they love each other perfectly. So when the Father thought about the Son, he could have no other reaction than love. Perfect love. When the Spirit watched the compassion of the Father for the Son, he could have no other reaction than to love the Father and the Son back. Before there was anything, God was completely satisfied within himself. In fact, creation itself is probably just the overflow of God's love. He didn't need to make us. He wanted to because he loves. And this is much more beautiful than if it wasn't true. What's a better phrase to hear from someone? I love you, I need you, or I love you, I want you. Which one of those is better to hear? It's the second one, isn't it? I love you, I want you. Because the first one, if someone is saying, I need you, they're really saying, me loving you is all about me. But when someone says, I love you, I want you, it's nothing to do with you. They love you simply because they love you. That is what God is like with us. He's got an other-person-focused love. A love that's set upon us regardless of how good or bad or thin or fat, old or young. He loves because he loves. That's the first thing to say about God's love. Let's go a bit further though. Let's go for 1 John 4 verse 9. Because God's a God of love, how does he show his love? Well, verse 9 tells us, this is how God showed his love among us. I like it when the Bible puts things nice and simply like that for me. How did God show his love among us? He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. Now, I'm not going to go into massive detail on this, but I just want you to ponder something of what that must have been like for Jesus to be sent into this world and how that shows what God's love is like. So for a minute, we're going to try and get a handle on what it must have been like for Jesus to be in heaven before he comes to earth. Because he doesn't just poof into existence in Bethlehem. He exists before then. What was it like for him? Well, up until that moment, God's Son has been in heaven's glory for all of eternity past. He's been adored by everything that's there. There are angels there who are every moment of every day saying, holy, holy, holy about him. There's no sin. There's perfection. There's joy. It's glorious. Now, whatever image you've got in your mind of what that looks like, you can guarantee it falls far short of what it actually was. That's where Jesus existed. And then the Son moves from that sinless perfection and he goes to Bethlehem. And one writer puts it like this, and I thought this was brilliant. You know the shock you get when you jump into a pool of icy water? Now imagine going from a place with no sin to a place like Bethlehem or Jerusalem or London and becoming an infant who vomited and soiled his nappy and grazed his knees and got tired for the first time in his existence, who felt pain and faced temptation, was misunderstood, was bereaved and rejected. Not because he needed you, not because you're worth it, but because he set his love upon you. That's why he comes, because he set his love upon you. But it didn't stop there, and I'm going to draw on this book again to read the next bit. Then goes on to say this. Now come with me 10 miles north of Bethlehem to a rubbish dump, outside Jerusalem 30 years later. Much has changed. The infant, the most powerful symbol of the love of God that could ever has been given, has grown into a man. But a man no longer physically capable of being recognized because of the wounds on his face and the flesh which has been ripped from his back. And he's on the cross and he stays there. The sky above him no longer has stars proclaiming his birth, but there are dark clouds in the sky. The two people that are on either side of him are not loving parents but common criminals. There are no angels saying, Hosanna in the highest. There's a crowd mocking him, saying, let his blood be on our head. And he stays on the cross. His earthly father has died. His earthly mother looks on with tears in her eyes. His closest friends have abandoned him or denied him or betrayed him. And he stays on the cross. The government has conspired against him. They've condemned him unjustly. And he stays on the cross. And at the same time, the anger of God at all of our lies and all of our lust and all of our pride and all of our envy and all of our greed is being poured on him. And for the first time ever, the relationship of perfect love between a father and a son is broken. And he stays on the cross. And as we listen to his words from the cross, we hear things like this. A man who thinks about his friends. A man who thinks about his mother. A man who thinks about the criminal next to him. A man who thinks about the crowds and cries out, Father, forgive them. And with his last breath, as his lungs were probably filling up with blood, he cries, it's finished. That's love. That's love. Look at 1 John 4, verse 10. This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sin. He doesn't do it because we're lovable. He doesn't do it for that reason. He does it because he's loving. That's why he does it. He does it because he is love. God's anger at every injustice ever committed is expressed and paid for, and at the same time he manages to love people. His anger is expressed and he still manages to love us. Perfect action, perfect emotion. That is God's love, or at the very least, a little push of the pool table. When we start to think about what God's love is like, quite often we can only express it in poetic ways. And it's normally in the lyrics of songs that do it best. So there's one song we sing quite regularly from The Squalor of a Borrowed Stable. It's got this line in it. He fights for breath, he fights for me. That's God's love. There's another older song, Love Divine, All Love's Excelling. Joy of heaven to earth come down. That's God's love. And there's a fairly new song which has got into my head recently called Reckless Love, which I find captures the sense of wonder at God's love, and at the same time it catches the sense of amazement that we should have, because here are some of the lyrics. I love these lyrics. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. And it means reckless there because to us it looks crazy. It doesn't mean God's crazy. It means that kind of love looks crazy. And so for God to love you, as he said to his people centuries ago where we began the service, it's not about you. It's because he's chosen to set his love upon you. So if you are a follower of Jesus today, God would say to you, I love you simply because I've set my love upon you. Not because you're better or wiser or stronger, but because I chose you in grace and I've made you mine forever, and I'm going to make you like Jesus. Because it doesn't stop with him saving us. It doesn't even stop in eternity. He loves us forever. So that is what I would love you to take and much more into your small group this week. That's what God's love is like. What should ours be like in response? Let's pray. Father God, when I start to think of what your love is like, it should astound me. But all too often it doesn't. And I guess there's people in the room who are like me. Sometimes we know things, but we don't really know them. And so we would ask tonight that if anything has struck us about your love and its depth and its wonder, that we would not lose it when we walk out the door. But instead, we would be amazed at the God who is like a shepherd who will leave 99 sheep alone to go and search out the one. We want to thank you that that's the kind of God that you are. We want to thank you that you are the kind of God who is like a father running across a field to throw his arms around the son who wished he was dead. We want to thank you that you are the kind of God who would give up his own son and let him go to the cross for us. And so whereas we know love is an action and we know that it's a choice that we have to make, we also know it's an emotion too. And so we would ask this, that our emotions towards you would be right, and we would be inspired by your love to love those around us, to love the person at work who gets on our nerves, to love the member of our family who irritates us more than any other member of our family, to love the neighbour who always parks in the way of our driveway. Whatever it might be, we ask that we might be people filled with and characterised by your love. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.